Moustapha Akkad is best known as the executive producer of the Halloween movies, but he had a very interesting career beyond that, including directing a movie that's one of the most controversial films in history. When he died in a supposed terrorist bombing in 2005, many believed there was far more to the story of his death. Most people know Moustapha Akkad from the Halloween movies. He executive produced and financed the original Halloween in the late 1970s and was executive producer for 7 more Halloween movies after that. But the Halloween movies weren't his only films, and in fact, the movie he made in 1976 before Halloween was one of the most controversial movies in the history of cinema. It was named Mohammed, Messenger of God, and it told the life story of the Muslim prophet Muhammad. This was an absolutely massive movie with a budget of $17 million. Just for reference, Star Wars came out around the same time and its budget was only $11 million. And Akkad's goal was to create a sprawling action movie that would educate the Western world about the beginnings of the Islamic religion. Interestingly, Muhammad Messenger of God nearly starred Muhammad Ali. Ali famously converted to Islam during his boxing career and wanted to star in Muhammad's story. But Akkad turned him down because he felt it would be difficult for audiences to believe Ali was being tortured and abused in the film. Now, the reason this movie is considered so controversial is because images and visual depictions of Muhammad are forbidden by Islam, and violating this can be met with deadly consequences. South Park planned to show Muhammad in an episode in 2010, and the creators received death threats. When 2 gunmen killed 12 people at the office of French magazine Charlie Hebdo, the attack was blamed on the magazine mocking Muhammad. And there are many other examples of attacks that allegedly took place as retaliation for depicting Muhammad. Akkad avoided showing Muhammad in his movie by having a first-person camera perspective with the actors addressing the camera directly from the unseen Muhammad's point of view. And this first-person filming technique was later used in Halloween to great acclaim. Akkad's ambitious goal with the movie was to unite the Western world and the Islamic culture. He said, "Being Muslim myself who lived in the West, I felt it was my obligation to tell the truth about Islam. I thought I should tell the story that will bridge this gap to the West." Because the film was about such a sensitive topic, it was hugely controversial. A group of Islamic scholars called it, quote, an insult to Islam, and the crew was forced out of Morocco by the military during filming. When the film was finally finished, it was banned in almost every Middle Eastern country. But the wildest thing that happened was in the US. After Muhammad Messenger of God premiered in the United States on March 9, 1977, a group of terrorists armed with machetes and machine guns seized 3 buildings in Washington, D.C. and held over 100 people hostage, demanding that the movie be withdrawn from theaters and threatening to cut off the hostages' heads if it wasn't. One person was killed by the terrorists, and the standoff lasted for 3 days, and Akkad pulled the movie from theaters during the hostage situation. Akkad changed the name of the movie to The Message, a less controversial name, but the movie never recovered from being pulled during its opening weekend and only grossed $2 million in the US. For the rest of his career, Akkad would continue to release Halloween movies, which typically made tons of money, and then used the money to fund projects to educate people about the Arab world. He made another film titled Lion of the Desert about the famous warrior Omar Mukhtar. Akkad described the film as the first time Americans had ever cheered for an Arab character at the end of a movie. And this goal of his to educate the Western world about Islam and show it in a positive light may have led to his death. Barely a month after the September 11th attacks in 2001, a curious thing happened when Karl Rove, who was senior advisor to the Bush White House, traveled to Hollywood and met with studio heads and major movie producers. Rove was there to enlist Hollywood's help in the war on terror. Basically, he wanted Hollywood to create movies and TV shows that portrayed America and the war in a positive light to get the public to support the war. And one of the ways this was done was by portraying Arabs as bad guys in movies and perpetuating this stereotype that Muslims were terrorists and mad bombers we needed to be saved from. Now, obviously, this was the opposite of Moustapha Akkad's goal of portraying Muslims in a positive light in films. And at the time, Akkad was preparing another film titled Saladin, which was about a legendary Muslim sultan who captured Jerusalem in a battle against the Crusaders. This was to be a major release starring Sean Connery with a budget of $80 million. And a movie like this, about a Muslim hero who leads a battle to claim Jerusalem for the Muslims, would be totally opposite of the type of movies Hollywood was releasing. But the movie never got made because on November 11th, 2005, Mustafa Akkad died in a terrorist bombing in Jordan. He was attending a wedding with his daughter when three coordinated explosions happened at hotels throughout Jordan. 57 people died in the blasts, which were blamed on Al Qaeda. And with his death, it wasn't just his movie Saladin that never saw the light of day. He planned to release other similar films that positively portrayed Muslims too. His close friend Tahir Masri, who was the former prime minister of Jordan, said he had a good sense of what he wanted to do. He wanted to establish an Arab cinema production company to make big productions about Arab history and historical figures. And you just have to wonder about the timing of his death and if there was more to the story. He was basically the only Arab producer in Hollywood and one of the few influential people working towards depicting Arabs more positively on screen. At the time of Akkad's death, the war on terror was really just beginning, and at least initially, the public mostly supported the war. And a lot of this was because many people really did view Muslims like they saw them in the movies, as a bunch of radical terrorists. Mustafa Akkad was trying to change those perceptions through film. And considering just how much money was involved in the war on terror, it's definitely possible he could have been targeted to silence a voice that was trying to show people a different, more positive side to the Arab culture. Now, Al Qaeda was blamed for the bombing that killed him, and there's a lot of gray area around Al Qaeda. There have always been questions about who exactly is behind Al Qaeda and where they get their funding from, and even if they're responsible for some of the attacks they've been blamed for. Regardless of if it was a coincidence that Mustafa Akkad just happened to be in the hotel at the moment it was bombed, or if there was more to the story, his death was mourned in the Middle East, where he was idolized by many. It's as if some demonic power is mocking our dreams, one friend said, because Mustafa represented hope.